Welcome, it's another segment of In Depth and Out Loud, bringing the real world of work to you as a student to make it all make sense. You know, everything that you're studying and how it fits into the world of work. And today, my guest is all about radio. I mean, we're talking 25 years in the industry, a man who has seen it all from on the mic to behind the scenes, music compiling, doing some creative work, and ultimately being a station manager at 947. His name is Ravi Naidoo, former station manager at 947 and currently a radio consultant doing his own thing. Welcome, Ravi.
Thanks, Mo. Good to see you. Nice to be here.
As my former boss, it makes it quite interesting to talk about radio because I think at a personal level, I have known you to be in the programming, and sort of station management side of the radio business for pretty much my entire career. What has been the thing that has kept you in the business for so long? I mean, 25 years is an entire career for some broadcasters.
Mo, I think it's about, being able to adapt and to be agile. I've obviously seen the radio industry grow from, kind of being a one-way communication where it was a presenter talking into a microphone and hoping that somebody's listening at the end of it, right? To where now I think you can actually gauge, when content is resonating with the audience, I think when there's engagement. But to do that, I think whether you're a presenter, whether you're programming, whichever part of the chain that you sit, you've got to be aware of what's out there. So I think growing and learning, understanding new technologies, understanding new platforms and how to integrate that into broadcasting. And I think also for me particularly, surrounding myself with people that actually have the answers that I don't have. And I think that's important.
Yeah, it's a lot of learning. And I want to also take it to my own experience, having spoken to a lot of students who want to get into radio. A lot of them, Ravi, just want to be presenters. And you know very well that there's more to the radio business than just the microphone. So take me through just some of the different areas that are out there for young people who might have had a very sort of myopic view.
Well, I think that's such an important point when people want to make radio your career. And, my simple advice is, I think learn the disciplines before you get to it. It's the science before you get to the art, okay? Because it's the science that creates the foundation before you can get to the art. So yes, everyone is fixated of obviously wanting to be the next Mo Flava, okay? Which is great. But I think the work that it takes to get there, I think is the discipline, it's the structure, it's the foundation. So my advice to somebody who wants to get into the radio and maybe build up to a radio career, get behind the scenes first. Because if you're in behind the scenes and if you understand, music programming to producing, to digital, I think to audio editing and all the disciplines that go to there, I think you have a better chance of being a great radio talent. And also the other flip side of it is that it gives you the career trajectory to get behind the scenes once your career is over. So I think you can come full circle. That would be my approach to somebody who wants to make a career in radio.
Yeah, I want to talk about you and your own journey because every time you talk about your time on air, it's almost like, at which point was that in this 25-year journey? But you've had a bit of that and everything else. How has that sort of worked out for you? And how is that sort of, just giving you a sense of the space in general in terms of radio and how it works?
Well, I think, so when I started, obviously on air and I was a really bad presenter, by the way. That's what they say. But you're a bad presenter, they put you in management. I'm kidding. So the point is, at that point, I don't think I understood what it actually takes to be a radio presenter, right? Because I think it was switch on the mic, you speak when you want to speak. There was no sort of discipline around that. And I think as I sort of learned to understand the dynamics around that and like you talk to people in different, globally. And I think also that's a huge part of it. You can't just think about your own space. You've got to lift your head up and see what else is out there. And I think a lot of presenters, and I did this when I was a broadcaster. You listen to another presenter and you try and mimic and sound like them. But actually that's the worst thing you can do. The best thing you can do is be yourself and be authentic and real. I mean, I never got a chance to do that because I moved behind the scenes, but I learned that from a lot of consultants I worked with, which is, when you're on air, learn the disciplines, learn the formatics, right? Because that's quite important. Make sure you are relevant and you're relatable, which is, something that I tried to with the presenters that I worked with in my career, whether it was music or whether it was programming, is just to understand what makes this presenter tick versus this. And I don't think there's a cookie cutter, one size fits all kind of approach to it,
What makes a radio station work, Ravi? I mean, it's multifaceted. You've mentioned the music, you've mentioned the presenters, the producers. What is it that actually makes a radio station work?
So Mo, in my view, I think there's probably three parts to it, okay? One is, I think every radio station needs to have its identity, its format, its structure, what it stands for, right? And that you call the disciplines. That's the foundation. How you sequence the music, where you put the content, how you sell the ads. I think that's one part. The second part of it is, I think, is the people and the personalities and the talent. And when I say talent, my reference to talent is everybody that contributes to making the sound of the station.
Right.
A lot of people just think it's about the presenters. Yes, it is. But ultimately, whatever goes behind the scenes to make them sound good is just as important. And I think the third part, which for me is I think there's a lot of attention, or a lack of attention. And that's the vibe and the energy and the chemistry of people and what happens in the building and how it comes out of the speaker, right? So the first two parts, any station can have a format and have a structure. They can have great people, but I think the third element connects the first two together, which is the vibe and the energy. And I think when people who are wanting to get into radio, I think it's important that you understand you can learn the skills, which I think Boston's great at doing, giving you all the different facets out of it. I think you get into an organization where you click in the chemistry. But I think when you get into a building, when you get into a radio station, the energy and the vibe and how you connect with your fellow peers, I think is incredibly important. Put those three together, and I think you got an incredible radio station. I think also a lot of people don't realize, when they listen to a station, they're able to tell whether that station is a happy station, a sad station, and where the people are actually connected and work together. I mean, people pick that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a great example of that for me would be YFM at some stage, where the fun the presenters were having on air was as much as whatever was happening off air, and that came across a great deal.
Exactly, and I think that element goes to, I think, people's personality and dynamics. And and my advice to students who want to get into radio, remember, it's being a great asset to a company is made up of two elements. It's a skills, it's an ability, and it's willingness. Willingness is the part of attitude, and you can't put a price to that.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the talent behind the mic.
Yes.
I believe, Ravi, that radio will never lie to you. If you are great behind the mic, radio will tell you. What is it that you need to have to be a great talent behind the mic? And you've worked with many great talents over the years, at 947 in particular.
Yeah, I think, Mo, this is the main thing, I think, is just always be eager to learn new skills if you're going to get behind it. I think there's the people dynamic, the psychology about radio is really important. Okay, so you're going to deal with, and I've had people in tears because somebody has said something to them and they fall in a heap. You've got to pick yourself up, and it's not personal. Okay,
right.
So it's the people dynamic side that you've always got to. I think you got to read, you got to watch videos, you got to better yourself in that space. But I think skills is the next part of it. And I say skills, so your tertiary education sets you up as a foundation to get there. But you always got to be hungry to learn what's the next skill out of it. So as digital has evolved, I mean, now it's AI. You got to work out, is AI beneficial to radio or can it inhibit radio, right? I think it's beneficial. And once, like everything, when social media came out, everybody sort of abused it, thinking that, it replaced the form of radio, but it's a great enabler.
Sure.
So you got to work out what skills are going to enable you to get there, But I think there's two dynamics. It's the people dynamic, learn and grow and be aware. And I think self-awareness is a huge part, which people don't worry about because they get consumed in their own ego.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that point up, because if you want to be behind the mic, it's either you have the ability or you don't. What has been your go-to in working that out? Because you've had a lot of people send you demos. You've worked with a lot of people who have been in the industry for a while.
Well, actually, let me disagree with you. I don't think you either, people say, are you born to be behind the mic or you're not, right? And I can give you some case studies where people that if you put them in a mold and you'd say, can they be on air? Probably all the arrows are pointing in the wrong direction. But actually, it's their willingness that has actually made them great.
Give me an example of that.
Darren Simpson, Wackhead Simpson, right? And your colleague, you worked in KFM.
Yeah.
All the arrows pointed that not great radio voice,
Yeah.
Right? So he never felt never went through the mold of, he has the typical radio timbre in his voice and that kind of stuff. In fact, he was quite squeaky, right? So everyone wrote him off from day one. 2 is then he became part of a morning show where he was a contributor. And his prank calls then started to get traction around it. And then he became the presenter of the show. And everybody said, you're coming off the back of a typical radio presenter, you'll never make it. His main drive was because he was so determined to make sure that his content was relevant, he was relatable, and he was seen as the normal, nice guy that I can see having a conversation. Okay, so if you put him in a sort of an acid test, no great radio voice, no experience, not exactly the person that, if you stack him up against other great radio personalities, you'll go, well, how did you even get there? So I think you can build somebody up, right? But I think it does take time, and you've got to have patience with it from that perspective, Now, if you've got all the arrows, and imagine if you put that same level of effort, you'll be a superstar.
How do you get in, Ravi? Everybody has their own unique story of how they got into radio. For a student who's gone through the journey of studying, they've got recordings, demos, radio shows that they've done. How do you get into a radio station?
So I think the old approach of, I'm going to cut a demo and I'm going to send it to 10 radio stations and hope that somebody's going to call me, I think is done. Okay. I think you've got to really put yourself out there. And when I say put yourself out there, there's a very fine line between being a pain in the butt, right, and promoting what you're good at. Okay.
Sure.
So I think it's always making sure that you're relevant in terms of the space, and you always got to be putting together and cutting audio that shows your personality and your creativity. I think the next thing is, if you're going to be wanting to be on radio, I think you got to pick the stations that match your fit and your personality. And I think that's really important, okay? Because when you send the demo to 10 radio stations, have you considered what that station is all about? Are you going to be relevant to the target audience? Does your style and your fit and your relevance, suit, or are you just doing it because I'm trying to tick a box? And I think you've got to listen to the station, and I think your demo has also got to be tailor-made for that particular brand. Okay, but I think when you supply your demo, I think you've also got to give the station a sense of where you belong on it, right? Now, not everybody like yourself is talented enough to get onto breakfast. And I think sometimes you also got to call it earlier. You're going to say, well, I'm never going to be a breakfast presenter. I'm not going to be a drive presenter. I am going to be probably the best 9 to 12 presenter. So I think having audio and data that says, this is the station, or these are the stations I want to be on.
Sure.
I think being realistic of where you want to be, right? And that you can have an enormous career on 9 to 12 or 12 to 3 or 7 to 10. Not everybody's going to land up in breakfast. So I think you got to be realistic. And I think make sure that you fit the style of the formats of the station that you want to work on. Don't just do a spray and pray approach.
Are some shows more important than others?
No. So depends on who you ask. Okay, so radio is an incredible medium where it's about people's habits. It's about how people consume radio. So whether they get up in the morning, they're listening during the day, and obviously now it's different because it's now I can consume radio in a different form. Catch up in a way if I'm watching it on social platforms, or depending on if it's an app or a podcast and all that stuff.
Sure.
I think it's about, yes, certain shows hold value from a commercial perspective because that's the old way of how things are valued. But I think, I'm going to use 9 to 12 as an example, right? And I know you do it, but let's even look at 7 to 10 at night, right? Let's use that as an example. 7 to 10 at night, I've always deemed as the nighttime breakfast show, right? So it may not have the same numbers as a breakfast show or a drive show.
Sure.
But what you're able to do from a commercial and a content perspective is far richer than if you had to do breakfast and drive, okay? It's important that the presenter needs to understand that that's the context you operate in. So for me, it's the sum of all parts, far greater than the whole, okay? So yes, certain shows do hold value from a commercial perspective, right? But for me, it's about the richness and the content that it gives to listeners.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to the commercial side. I want to talk about what makes a great radio program, radio show, especially with what you've seen, all the different presenters and teams that you've worked with. what do you think the formula is really?
So, I mean, I'm going to go back to, I think, discipline, right? I think being able to structure, the line is the most creative people are the ones that work better in boundaries, right? So I think you got to know what that boundary and that structure is depending on the show that you do. And if you do that, and if you understand that, what people need from me in this show is X, okay? You've then got to work hard to make your content relatable and relevant, right? But I think most importantly, be very creative and be curious, right? So I'll give you a simple example. I think a lot of presenters do interviews, do features, do shout outs, do phone calls because they assume that is what their audience wants, number one, or it's about filling the clock in an hour. Okay, so it's just like, okay, I've got 6 links in the hour, so let me fill it with a feature, let me fill it with an interview, let me fill it with a shout out or engagement. And what you don't realize is that a tune-out factor for a listener, right? Or I'm really engaging with the listener. So do I rather then just have a great interview for maybe 2 links, and that interview would actually give me a better engagement level than maybe a shout-out or a feature, okay?
Right.
And I think that kind of evaluation needs to happen on a regular basis. So features, by one way of example, or interviews. So people don't realize when you do interviews is that you really got to make sure that interview, can it be replicated, right? So if you've got a music artist or somebody of interest that's coming in, the same thing that you're going to read on Wikipedia or YouTube, asked by another guest, are you going to do the same?
Sure.
Right? So you've really got to flip it on its head and go, what questions am I going to ask? Am I going to ask the questions that nobody else has answered? Am I going to make this guest feel comfortable, or I'm going to make them uncomfortable? Some interviews, and not because it's designed to be there, but just because the way it turns out. And the same with features. Features, everybody does a quiz and everybody does the 10-second challenge because that's what's been done before. So I think really sitting and evaluating your content on a regular basis will make you a great talent.
So then, clearly, creativity is quite important
100%.
when you are getting into radio, and not just as an on-air personality. Because if you think about the role that, say, producers play as well, what is that role from your experience, and what really makes a good producer that can really contribute meaningfully to whatever program that they're working on?
There's a line that says short and tight, right? And everybody starts getting nervous when you say short and tight because they think you want you to say less, right? And in a way it's true, but it's actually short and tight are not the same. Tight is probably the way to go. So short just means you come on and you spew out the content and you hope that someone's going to pick it up. Tight is really the crispness of how that content lands, okay? So how you produce it. And I think, particularly in this day of radio and audio now, I think a lot of presenters and producers per se, are not getting enough audio as part of their creativity, right? Because we've kind of defaulted into letting everything be either verbal from the presenter, or we allow listeners to kind of dictate that to a way. Listeners are important, but I think the presenter's got to lead it. So I think crisp, tight presentation, crisp, tight audio, and content that is also talks to that kind of execution.
Sure. And how do you measure the success of all this content? The success of a breakfast show, afternoon, 9 to 12, whatever?
Well, I mean, Mo, there's obviously audience figures that comes with it, right? But I think
let's talk about that. How does that work?
Yeah, listen, in a way, it's a bit like looking in the rearview mirror, right? Because, you get the data sort of 3 months down the track. You probably can't gauge, what worked on this day versus that day, right? For me, I think social platforms are important in that space. Not to say that you use it as the gospel, right? But I think, there's a combination of what I would feel, gut feel. I don't think we use our gut feel enough, right? So I think gut feel is really important. But, I think the engagement by the audience, and I'm not talking about the active audience, and there's a very important myth that I've got to dispel. A lot of people, when they plan their radio shows or present radio shows, and they run on a topic and they get 20 callers and the phone starts ringing and people think, oh, this topic is great, okay? the people that engage with you on the social, those phone numbers or messages or WhatsApp, that's what you call your active audience, right? And that's a very small percentage of your actual real audience. It's actually your passive audience that you gotta worry about. So the sort of numbers is like 5% if you're lucky of your audience that will engage with the station, enter a competition, send in a request, send in a voice note. Don't be fixated by the 5%. Be fixated by the 95%, right? And you will hear it where people might just drop you a note and say, Mo, I thought that was an incredible interview. That's the person that you want. They're not calling you to be part of the content. They're calling you to comment on your show. And I think when producers and presenters start really being fascinated and fixated with that, so you've got to find platforms. And I know a lot of, Prime Media, for one of them, is very invested in creating those passive platforms to find out what people really think.
Sure.
Sure. And I think once you get that right, I think then you know truly whether you resonate or not. But I think there's enough experience in a show with a producer, a digital producer, and contributors that come there where you actually know whether content's actually resonating or not. Unfortunately, you can't get probably the detail that you want, which is, is it a male or female, and you won't get that level of detail yet. But I think that's probably where it's going to.
And outside of a great show, what else do radio stations do to come across as exciting, to keep the attention of their audience, always fixated on that particular radio station or even radio show?
Well, I mean, I think if you take all the presenters and all the shows that go together, obviously, each show is configured differently. Some are teams, some are duos, some are single presenters. If you put all of that together, it obviously stands for what the station stands for, the brand identity and the kind of brand resonance that it has. But to the point I was making earlier around formats and disciplines are one part of it, right? I think when you take the station, and if you have to equate that station to a person, what does that person stand for, right? And this is what goes into, I think, to prospective students and you're working out, I want to get into a radio career. You also got to think about what's your purpose that you have personally, and how does that purpose align with the station that you're on, right? So, a lot of stations can play great music, have great presenters, but they're seen as kind of very shallow and fickle, right? You're not seen as a person. You're not seen as kind of somebody that you can have a conversation with. And I think purpose is so important these days, not only for, any business, but I think for a radio station more so, right? Because that can't be replicated. If you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, all of these music streams, right? They serve a purpose of why you use them, okay? But what people look for from radio is a connection, like a one-to-one connection. Now, that one-to-one connection is driven by the presenters. It's driven by the producers who put that content together, social media, how it comes across. But ultimately, when people listen to that station, they think, this is my best friend that I can count on when I want to win stuff, when I want great music, but also when I know that the station does a lot for the community.
Right.
So I think that purpose is really important.
So that purpose, in the example you're giving about, doing something for the community, would fall under some banner of a campaign that a station does, or, a drive, as it were.
No. So I think that's where stations go wrong, because I think drives and campaigns are great, okay, but I think it's got to be always on, right?
Right.
And it doesn't mean you've got to be raising money or fundraising all the time. I think it's got to come in your content, and I think it's got to come in your delivery, okay? So sometimes it's not even about raising money. It's actually about, I know you've done it on your show many times. You highlight and illustrate great people that are entrepreneurs. You highlight organizations that have done stuff without ever wanting it. In fact, you've got to find the silent heroes that you kind of want to, amplify and promote. But it's not a campaign. You see, I think that's where the people make mistakes, is they think, okay, we're going to do a Christmas campaign and we're going to do a blanket drive and we're going to help animals, and then hopefully we get the credit with I think people see through it. I think they see through it. I think, if you want to be a radio presenter, and if you want to be a producer, and if you really want to have impact, think about it from a perspective of, I really want to make a difference. Okay, I'm not just ticking the box to say I want to, a campaign.
Another big thing is money, Ravi. And I know,
I know nothing about money, yeah?
as somebody who has worked at Prime Media, a business that has done really well in the broadcasting space, revenue is important. So how do radio stations make money, and do all radio stations make money the same way?
Yeah, pretty much. I think, at the end of the day, your stock and your trade is airtime, right? Your airtime is what you can sell. Yeah, unfortunately, it's either perceived as fresh air, right? Or you got to do a really good job of packaging it up so it sounds like it's not just a commodity. So ultimately, all stations have the same approach. I think it's about how you package it up. And I think you mentioned creativity, right? The stations that win, and I think, I can give you examples of whether it be local or internationally. I think the approach has been, we got to have a foundation of what people want from advertising, and that's the traditional, what you call the 30-second advert.
Yes.
I think what's not spent a lot of time goes into the creativity and the execution of adverts, right? So I'm a big fan of UK radio. The UK TV radio adverts are insane. They're hell of a creative. You don't even think you're listening to a radio ad. So I think radio advertising of normal commercials is important. I think the other layers that go into that is promotions, contests, giveaways. That's important. Features are important in that space. So that's the kind of model that you use. You take your airtime, you package it up in a really clever, execution way. And I think that part for people wanting to get into radio, I think that's a part that a lot of people don't see as a career opportunity, right? So, people see the content, they see the presenter side.
Sure.
But my advice to anybody who wants to make a career out of it, right? And I saw this many years ago, where there's an opportunity. If you're a content presenter or contributor, be it a presenter, producer, and if you're able to understand what works for a client from a content perspective, you are an incredible, valuable asset to the company,
right?
Because you're able to take the content and the commercial and make them meet in the middle.
And that's a career opportunity. There's a position for people who do.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, it's something that there's actually a dearth of talent in that space at the moment, right? Because it's either people want to play in the content space,
sure, or
the commercial space only. No one's thinking about how can I bring both of these together. So I think that's a massive opportunity in terms of positions.
Sure. So when you get to a radio station and you're knocking on the door, you could be any one of the following. What in your experience?
Well, I think you got to look at the organization, right? So similar to when I said you got to put together a demo. I think it's really important, and I know listen. I know the younger generation want to get from here to there like really quickly, and you can. But I think to do that, I think you really got to understand what's your length and breadth in this organization. To do that, do your homework. Get in there and say, right, if it's the SABC or it's Prime Media or whatever the organization is, and you say, okay, right, cool. If I want to make a career out of myself, these are the areas that I can play in. Here's where I'm going to start. Here's where I want to go to, and here's where I want to end up.
Absolutely. So for anybody who wants to get into radio, Ravi, where is the best place to start in trying to figure out where that is that you talk about?
Well, listen, Boston, I think, would have set people up to understand the different, kind of nuances of broadcasting and media, all right? I think for me, start behind the scenes first. That would be my first piece of advice. Listen, unless you're on a community station at the moment and you've got a few hours. It's like like a pilot flying a plane.
Sure.
You've got some hours under your belt. I think that's fine, but I think start behind the scenes first. I think digital, social media, and content contributors, great way to start, and also work out how you're going to give the organization something different that they don't have. So you almost got to find a gap and say, I'm going to be this person that gives you this that you don't have. Because then that, I think, opens the conversation with a program or a content or a station manager.
Ravi, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your contribution to the industry, working with so many great talents that we've seen come and go on air. Some are still there. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of stuff here that is going to be of great value to the students that are watching.
Cool. Thanks, Mo. Good being here. Appreciate it.
Well, there you go. In depth and out loud, bridging the gap, making sure that we make practical, everything that you're learning in the broadcasting course with whatever's happening in the industry, obviously with radio in this particular point. Join us again next time as we go into another space.